Henry Caldwell was 16 years old, sitting on his cabin porch on a September morning when he noticed a spider building a web between two fence posts. The wind was blowing hard enough to knock a man's hat off, but the spider kept working. Its web stretched and swayed but never broke. "How do you do that?" Henry asked aloud. His dog, a thick-furred shepherd named Bear, lifted his head at the question. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. His human was thinking again. Thinking meant projects. Projects meant adventure. Henry watched the spider for an hour. He noticed how the web gave with the wind instead of fighting it. How the anchor points were spread wide for stability. How the whole structure was flexible but connected. That night he started drawing. 3 years earlier the Great White Storm had taken 17 lives in Cold Creek. People who froze trying to walk between buildings, including Henry's mother. The village had mourned, rebuilt, and moved on. But Henry hadn't moved on. He'd been waiting, watching, thinking. Now he had an answer. "I'm going to build a covered passage," he told Bear, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Canvas on wooden frames connecting all the buildings. When the next blizzard comes, people will walk through it like that spider walks through the wind." Bear's tail thumped against the porch. He didn't understand the plan, but he understood excitement. That was enough. Everyone said it was impossible. They were wrong. Montana Territory, September 1892. The village of Cold Creek had been founded by miners and trappers 30 years before, and it still carried the old ways, the stubbornness, the self-reliance, and the belief that surviving winter was simply a matter of being tougher than the cold. The village was laid out in the traditional way. Houses clustered around a central square with the church on one side, the general store on another, the town hall on a third, and the livestock barns on the fourth. It was efficient for summer when people moved freely between buildings. It was dangerous in winter when the gaps between structures became gauntlets of wind and snow. The Great White Storm of 1889 had proven that. 17 people caught in a blizzard that struck without warning, frozen within sight of their own doors. Henry's mother had been one of them. She'd gone to help a neighbor's sick child, and the storm had caught her on the way back. Henry had spent 3 years since then watching, thinking, and preparing. The spider had finally shown him how. "You want to build what?" William Porter was the town elder, 63 years old, with a beard that had seen more winters than most of the villagers combined. He sat in his chair by the fire, looking at Henry like the boy had proposed building a ladder to the moon. "A covered passage," Henry repeated. Canvas stretched over wooden frames connecting the main buildings, the church to the general store, the store to the town hall, and the hall to the barns. A complete circuit so people can move between buildings without going outside. In winter, when the snow buries everything, the frame will be strong enough to shed snow, and if it collapses, we rebuild. Better to rebuild canvas than to bury more bodies. William was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, his wife, Martha, paused her knitting to listen. "The Great White Storm was 3 years ago," William finally said. "We've had hard winters since then. No one has died because we've been lucky. Because the bad storms came at night when everyone was inside." Henry leaned forward. "What happens when the next storm comes at midday? When people are scattered across the village? When children are at school and parents are at work and the old ones are at church, then they stay where they are until it passes. My mother tried to stay where she was. She was 200 feet from our door." Henry's voice stayed steady. Matter of fact, 200 feet in a blizzard might as well be 200 miles. "The tunnel changes that." Martha set down her knitting. "He has a point, William." William sighed heavily. "Even if I agreed, Henry, we don't have the resources. Canvas costs money. Wood costs labor. And for what? A tunnel that might work or might collapse or might blow away in the first strong wind. I'm not asking for the village's resources. I'm asking for permission to use my own. Your own. You're 17. What resources do you have? 3 years of savings from trapping. Enough canvas from my mother's trading stock to cover 200 feet and my own 2 hands. Henry stood. I'll build it myself if I have to. I just need permission to connect the structures. William studied him. This boy who had grown up too fast, who had buried his mother with his own hands, who had spent 3 years planning something that everyone else had tried to forget. You have permission, William said finally. But don't expect anyone to help you. And when it fails, don't come crying to the council. When it works, Henry replied, I won't say I told you so. He left before William could respond. The building began on September 15th. Henry had planned everything in advance. The route the tunnel would take, the spacing of the support frames, and the amount of canvas needed for each section. He'd drawn diagrams, calculated angles, and estimated weights. He'd even built a small test section behind his cabin just to make sure the design would hold. The villagers watched him work with a mixture of curiosity and pity. The Caldwell boy has finally lost his mind, said James Crawford, the blacksmith, watching Henry haul wooden poles across the square. Building a tent in the middle of the village. He's been strange since his mother died, replied Father Thomas, the priest. Perhaps this is his way of grieving. Grieving doesn't usually involve blocking the main road with canvas and sticks. Everyone grieves differently, my son. James snorted. Well, when his tent blows away in the first storm, maybe he'll grieve like a normal person. Henry heard them. He heard everything. The whispers, the laughter, the predictions of failure. He heard his mother's name invoked as proof of his madness. Heard people say that grief had broken him, that he was wasting his time and his money on something that would never work. He kept building. Bear stayed with him through all of it, lying near whatever section he was working on, occasionally fetching dropped tools or barking encouragement. He was too old to help with the heavy work, but his presence was enough. When Henry felt like giving up, he would look at Bear and remember why he was doing this. We're going to make this village safe, boy, he would say. No more losing people to storms. Not here. Not ever again. The crossed frames were the foundation. Henry had designed them himself based on the tent structures he'd seen trappers use in the high country. 2 poles crossed and lashed together, spread at the bottom for stability, and joined at the top to support the canvas. Simple, strong, and easy to repair if damaged. He built 37 of them, each one taking half a day to construct and position. The work destroyed his hands. The rope he used for lashing cut into his palms until they bled. The rough wooden poles drove splinters deep under his skin. By the end of the first week, his fingers were so swollen he could barely grip his tools. He kept working. Bear would watch him bandage his hands each evening, whimpering softly, nosing at the bloody rags. He didn't understand why Henry was hurting himself, but he understood that his human needed comfort. He would curl up against Henry at night, his warmth better than any medicine. Almost there, boy, Henry would whisper. Almost there. The frames stretched across the village in a rough rectangle, connecting the 4 main buildings with a continuous wooden skeleton. Each frame had to be perfectly positioned. Too close and the canvas would sag. Too far and it would tear in the wind. Henry measured obsessively, adjusting and readjusting until every angle was correct. The villagers had to admit grudgingly that it looked sturdier than they'd expected. Still won't hold canvas in a real wind, James said, but he said it with less certainty than before. The canvas came next. Henry's mother had been a trader specializing in fabrics and supplies. When she died, she left him her inventory. Bolts of heavy canvas intended for tents and wagon covers, worth more than everything else he owned combined. He'd saved it for 3 years, knowing exactly what he would use it for. Stretching the canvas over the frames was the hardest part. The material was heavy and awkward and caught the wind like a sail. Henry needed help, but no one would give it. No one except Emma Wilson. She appeared on the 3rd day of the canvas work, a girl his own age with dark braided hair and a stubborn set to her jaw. Her father had died in the Great White Storm, too. Not during the storm itself, but a week later from the fever he'd caught trying to rescue survivors. You need someone to hold the other end, she said. It wasn't a question. I can manage. You can't. I've been watching. She grabbed the loose corner of canvas that had been giving him trouble all morning. I'll hold you secure. We'll finish 3 times faster. Henry wanted to argue. He'd promised himself he would do this alone and would prove that one person with enough determination could make a difference. But Emma was already pulling the canvas tight, and Bear was wagging his tail at the new helper. And sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she grinned. Wait until we see if this thing actually works. October brought the first test. A storm blew in from the northwest. Not a killing blizzard, but a serious snowfall with winds strong enough to knock a man down. The village braced for the worst, expecting to find Henry's tunnel collapsed and scattered across the square. Instead, they found it standing. The canvas billowed and strained against its ropes, but the crossed frames held firm. Snow piled on top and slid off the angled surface. The wind found no purchase on the smooth fabric walls, and inside the tunnel was calm. Henry walked from his cabin to the general store without feeling a single snowflake. The canvas blocked the wind completely, and the enclosed space was actually warmer than the open air. Not warm, but warm enough to make a difference. Bear trotted beside him, his tail wagging. He understood this was good. He understood they were safe. It works, Emma said, meeting him at the store entrance. Her eyes were wide. Henry, it actually works. This was a small storm. The real test will come later, but it works. He allowed himself a small smile. It works. Orcs. The villagers were less enthusiastic. They acknowledged that the ton survived but insisted it was luck, or that the storm hadn't been strong enough to realign it. It. Wait until a real blizzard, James said. That canvas will tear paper. Aper. The frames will snap like twigs, Wyatt added. You'll see, Henry replied. When the time comes, see. December brought the time. The storm arrived on December 19th, 3 years to the day since the Great White Storm. Some folks called it bad luck. Henry called it a chance to prove everyone wrong. It started the same way. A sudden pressure drop, a darkening sky, then white chaos descending so fast that people caught outside had no time to reach shelter. Except this time, there was the tunnel. Henry was in the general store when the blizzard hit. He heard the wind slam against building Andelding, heard the familiar howl that had haunted his nightmares for 3 years. But instead of fear, he felt something else. Readiness. The tunnel, he said to the handful of people in the store. Everyone into the tunnel now. It'll collapse, someone protested. It's held for 3 months. It'll hold now. Henry opened the door that connected the store to the canvas passage. Everyone who needs to get home, follow me. He stepped into the tunnel. The canvas walls shuddered with each gust of wind, but they held. Snow pressed against the fabric from outside, but none came through. The crossed creaked but stood firm. Henry started walking toward the town hall. Behind him, he heard footsteps. 1 person, then 2, then more. By the time he reached the hall, a dozen people were following him through the protected passage. My children are at the church. A woman gasped. Mary Miller, mother of 3. Please children. Dren. The tunnel connects to the church. Henry pointed down the next section. Way. They found the children huddled with father terrified but unharmed. Mary sobbed with relief, clutching them chest. Thank God, she whispered. God. The Miller children. They're safe. The news spread through the tunnel like fire. More people emerged from the church. Old Grandmother Peters, who hadn't left the building in 3 days. Young Henry Baker, who had been helping Father Thomas with repairs. The Jotwins, twins who had been at practice. Tice Point 11 people trapped blizzard arresard, now safe a tunnel. Unnell. But Henry done. Who else is missing? He called out. Who didn't make shelter? Shelter. The Hendersons, someone said. Their farm is outside the village, half east. East. They're beyond the tunnel, James said. The blacksmith had appeared at some point, his strong arms folded across his chest. Nothing do. Do. We can it. It. Everyone stared at Henry. In storm. James shook his head. Crazy. Razy. I have extra canvas. I have poles. If we work together, we can build a temporary extension to the hen farm. You'll trying. Maybe. Henry looked at the faces around him. The children clutching their mother. Woman trembling. The young man who had been so sure the tunnel would fail. Or maybe we save 4 more people. I'm going. Who sme? Me. For a long moment, moved. Then James Crawford uncrossy arms. I've been wrong about a lot of things, the blacksmith said. But I've never been a coward. Tell me what to do. They built a 200-foot extension in 3 hours, working in teams that rotated in and out of the protected tunnel. The canvas whipped and fought them. The poles were nearly torn from their hands, but they drove stakes and lashed ropes and pushed forward foot by foot into the white chaos. They found the Henderson family huddled in their barn, half frozen, certain they were going to die. Follow us, Henry said. There's a way back. The Hendersons stumbled through the makeshift tunnel, weeping with relief, unable to believe what they were seeing. By the time they reached the main passage, 15 people had been saved who would otherwise have died. Bear wagged his tail at each new arrival, as if personally welcoming them to safety. The blizzard lasted 4 days. For 4 days, the tunnel was the only way to move through the village. People used it to reach their homes, to check on neighbors, and to bring supplies from the general store to those who needed them. The canvas held against winds that would have frozen exposed flesh in minutes. The crossed frames stood against snow loads that collapsed 3 outbuildings. On the second day, William Porter used the tunnel to reach the church for evening prayers. On the third day, James Crawford used it to reach his forge, muttering something about checking the fires. On the fourth day, everyone was using it, because everyone understood that Henry had built the difference between life and death. When the storm finally broke, the village gathered in the town hall. Not a single person had died. Not a single case of frostbite. For the first time in living memory, a major blizzard had struck Cold Creek without claiming a single life. William stood before the assembly, his face drawn with exhaustion and something else, something that looked like shame. I owe this village an apology, he said. 3 months ago, a young man came to me with an idea. I told him it would fail. I told him no one would help him. I told him not to come crying when his tunnel collapsed. He turned to face Henry, who stood at the back of the hall with Emma on one side and Bear at his feet. I was wrong. William's voice cracked. I was wrong. And if I had been right, people would have died. My own grandchildren used that tunnel to reach safety. My own wife used it to bring medicine to a sick neighbor, because of a boy I dismissed as a grief-driven fool. The hall was silent. Henry Caldwell, William continued. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my family's lives. This entire village owes you. He walked through the crowd until he stood before Henry. Then, slowly, the old man bowed. Forgive an old fool, he said, and teach us how to make more. Spring came, and with it expansion. Henry spent the warmer months teaching anyone who wanted to learn. The tunnel design was simple enough that most families could build their own sections, connecting their homes to the main network. By the following winter, the tunnel system had tripled in length, reaching every building in the village. Emma became his partner in more ways than one. She had a gift for organization, for logistics, and for convincing stubborn people that new ideas weren't always dangerous. Together, they wrote down the construction methods, drew diagrams, and created a guide that could be shared with other villages. We should call it something, Emma said one evening as they sat by the fire in Henry's cabin. The tunnel system. It needs a name. My mother would have called it common sense, Henry replied. But it isn't common. That's the point. No one else thought of it. Henry considered this. What about the passage? Simple, descriptive. Boring. She smiled. What about the winter way? That's good. Henry nodded slowly. The winter way. It's not about me. It's about surviving. Emma reached over and took his hand. It's about both. Surviving and the person who showed us how. Bear, lying between them, thumped his tail against the floor. He was getting old now, gray in the muzzle and slow in his movements. But he still followed Henry everywhere. Still kept watch while he worked. Still believed in him as completely as he had on the day they'd buried his mother. He's a good dog, Emma said softly. The best. Henry scratched behind Bear's ears. He's been with me through everything. He'll be with you through more. But they both knew that wasn't true. Bear was 11 years old, ancient for a dog his size. He had one winter left, maybe two. Henry pulled him closer. Then we'll make them count. The winter way spread beyond Cold Creek. Other villages heard about the tunnel system through traders, through travelers, and through the simple power of a story too good not to share. They sent representatives to learn the techniques, to see the construction firsthand, and to bring the knowledge back to their own communities. Within 5 years, a dozen villages had winter ways of their own. Within 10 years, the system was standard practice throughout the Montana Territory. The canvas tunnels became as common as the buildings they connected, as natural a part of winter life as firewood and fur coats. The design evolved as it spread. Villages in forested areas used bark covering instead of canvas. Mountain settlements built their tunnels at angles to shed avalanche debris. Prairie communities added extra anchoring against the fierce open winds. Each change made the system stronger, more versatile, and more alive. Henry kept records of every variation, filling journal after journal with drawings and notes. He corresponded with builders across the territory, sharing successes and failures, learning from others as much as he taught. You're becoming famous, Emma told him one evening, holding up a newspaper from Helena. The headline read, Caldwell Tunnel System Saves 12 in Mining Camp Storm. The system is becoming famous, Henry corrected. I'm just the one who started it. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. He took the newspaper, studying the article. When I'm gone, the system will continue. That's what matters, not my name. Your name will continue too, Emma said softly. In every tunnel that's ever built, in every life that's saved. Whether you wanted it or not. Henry trained apprentices, dozens of them, each one carrying the knowledge forward. He never charged for lessons. He couldn't bring himself to profit from something that existed because his mother had frozen to death 200 feet from home. You could be rich, William told him once, years later. The old man was in his 70s now, slow but still sharp. Every village that uses your design owes you something. They owe me nothing. Henry shook his head. The design exists to save lives. If I charged for it, some villages couldn't afford it, and then people would die because I wanted money. Your mother would be proud. My mother would tell me I should have thought of it sooner. William laughed. Yes, she probably would have. Sarah was never one for sentimentality. No. Henry smiled at the memory. She wasn't. Bear died in the winter of 1895, curled up in his usual spot by the fire. Henry found him in the morning, peaceful, his gray muzzle resting on his paws as if he were only sleeping. He knew immediately that he wasn't. The cabin felt different without his breathing, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with space. He buried him at the entrance to the winter way, where Bear had spent so many hours watching him work. Emma helped him carve the marker, a simple wooden post with simple words. Bear. He kept watch. 1884 to 1895. The whole village came to the burial. Not because he was a remarkable dog, though he was, but because he represented something. Loyalty, perseverance, and the quiet faith that someone you love is doing something important even when you don't understand it. He believed in you, Emma said, holding Henry's hand as the snow began to fall. Before anyone else did, he believed. In everyone, Henry replied quietly. That was his gift. No. Emma squeezed his hand. He believed in you first. And because of that, the rest of us learned how. He believed in you specifically, Emma said gently. Dogs aren't stupid. They know who deserves their faith. He chose you. Henry nodded slowly, watching the snow settle on Bear's grave. 11 years of partnership. 11 years of silent support. Some friends leave a hole when they go. Bear had left a legacy, every wagging tail at every tunnel entrance, every bark of welcome when someone came through safely. I'll get another dog eventually, Henry said. But I'll never stop missing him. That's how it should be, Emma replied. That's how you know it mattered. Henry Caldwell married Emma Wilson in 1897, in a ceremony held in the Winter Way itself. It was Emma's idea, a wedding in the tunnel that had brought them together. Father Thomas performed the ceremony in the canvas-covered passage between the church and the town hall, with half the village crowded in to witness. This is unusual, the priest admitted. But then, everything about you two is unusual. We prefer unconventional, Emma replied. I prefer effective, Henry added. They raised 3 children in Cold Creek, each of whom learned to build tunnel frames before they could read. The Winter Way became the family legacy, not for profit, but for purpose. Each generation taught the next, ensuring that the knowledge would never be lost. William Porter died in 1903 at the age of 74. His last words, according to his daughter, were about the tunnel. Tell the Caldwell boy he was right. The old man had whispered. I should have helped him from the beginning. Henry spoke at the funeral, honoring a man who had started as a skeptic and ended as a champion. William Porter taught me something important, Henry said. He taught me that it's never too late to change your mind. That admitting you were wrong takes more courage than insisting you were right. That the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but whether they learn from them. He paused, looking at the grave. He also taught me that old men can be stubborn as rocks, but even rocks can be moved if you push long enough. The mourners laughed. William would have laughed too. Henry Caldwell died in 1951 at the age of 73. He passed in his sleep in the cabin his mother had built, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had never known a winter without the Winter Way. The tunnel system he'd started with a few crossed frames and some salvaged canvas now connected every building in the village and had inspired similar systems across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. His funeral procession used the Winter Way, carrying his body through the canvas passages he had built, past the spot where Bear was buried, to the cemetery where his mother had lain for 62 years. They buried him beside her, finally reunited. His grandson read the eulogy. My grandfather built something that everyone said was impossible, young William said, named for the elder who would eventually become Henry's strongest supporter. He did it because he made a promise at his mother's grave. And he was the kind of man who kept his promises. He paused, looking at the crowd that filled the cemetery and spilled into the Winter Way beyond. The tunnel system has saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Every winter that passes without a death from exposure is a winter that proves my grandfather right. He looked at the grave. But I don't think he ever cared about being right. He cared about making sure no other 16-year-old boy had to bury his mother because she froze 200 feet from home. Young William placed his hand on the casket. The Winter Way is his legacy, but it's not his only legacy. He also left us an example of what one person can do when they refuse to accept that tragedy is inevitable. When they look at a problem everyone else has given up on and say, I can fix this. He stepped back. Rest now, grandfather. Your mother is waiting, and the way will endure. The Winter Way still exists. Modern versions use synthetic materials instead of canvas, metal poles instead of wood, and heated passages in the most critical sections. But the principle remains the same. Connect the buildings, protect the passage, save the lives. Visitors to Cold Creek, now a small but thriving town, can still see the original route. The canvas has been replaced dozens of times, the frames rebuilt twice, but the path hasn't changed since 1892. At the entrance to the oldest section stands a memorial with 3 markers. Sarah Caldwell, 1849 to 1889. She walked into the storm so others wouldn't have to. Bear, 1884 to 1895. He kept watch. Henry Caldwell, 1878 to 1951. He built the way. Every winter, when the storms come and the temperatures drop and the wind howls between buildings, people walk through the covered passages and arrive safely at their destinations. Children go to school, elders go to church, families visit neighbors, and no one freezes 200 feet from home. That was the promise Henry made at his mother's grave. That is the promise the Winter Way keeps every single day.